반짝이는 눈빛 눈이 부셔 매일 날 감싸주는 손길
Just a dream, it's just a lie. Curiosity made me fall deeper, deeper.
You know about the history between me and Jung In, and yet you still agreed to help her? You really think I'm crazy for coming to talk to you about this? Baek Seol Ah's eyes narrowed, a mix of anger and disbelief flashing in her expression. You're crazy, she replied, her voice cold and bitter. You know everything about the bad blood between me and Moon Jung In, and yet you're doing her a favor by coming to talk to me? What do you think this is? Her words were sharp, as if each syllable was meant to slice through the tension in the room. For a moment, Woo Jin hesitated, almost as though he were reconsidering his next move. He wasn't lying when he said that Jung In had asked him to speak with her, but he also knew the truth of his own feelings. Yes, he admitted, his voice quieter now. She did ask me, but the only thing that matters to me is being able to work with you, to see you again. That's all. I keep telling myself I should retire, walk away from everything, but the thought of being far away from you, of never seeing you again, it stops me every time. Baek Seol Ah's expression softened for a brief moment, but then it hardened again. How many times do I have to tell you? She asked, her voice steady but resolute. We're over, Woo Jin, and I'm marrying director na. The words seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, Woo Jin couldn't quite process what she had just said. His eyes widened in disbelief, his voice shaking slightly as he asked, "What? You're marrying director na?" Baek Seol Ah's face was resolute, unwavering as she looked at him. "Yes," she said firmly, "we're getting married and I love him. I'm truly in love with him." There was a long pause, the silence between them stretching, thick with unspoken emotions. Woo Jin couldn't hide the hurt in his eyes, the confusion and pain that seemed to ripple through his expression. "Did you really mean what you just said?" he asked, almost as if he were trying to hold on to some thread of hope, some sliver of doubt that this was all just a misunderstanding. But Baek Seol Ah didn't waver. She met his gaze head-on, her voice unwavering as she responded, "I did." Meanwhile, other conversations were taking place, each one with its own weight and tension. Min Juryeon had been speaking to Lee Sun-e, her tone brimming with frustration and bitterness. She was angry at how her father's legacy was being taken for granted, how the blood and sweat he had poured into the family business seemed to mean so little to those who came after him. She spat out the words with disdain. "My dad spent his life building this business with his own blood and sweat." But Lee Sun-e, never one to be easily intimidated, responded with a laugh, her voice laced with sarcasm. "He put his blood and sweat into this all his life? That blood and sweat don't belong to your father. They belong to someone else." The tension in the air was palpable, the undercurrents of anger and rivalry running deep between the two women. Meanwhile, Min Tae-chang found himself where something caught his attention. He couldn't help but mention it to Moon Jung In, his voice carrying a hint of intrigue. "I just saw something interesting at the coffee shop just now." Moon Jung In, always calm and collected, raised an eyebrow. "You saw Director Na and Sokki meeting with Japanese people?" she asked, the connection immediately forming in her mind. The pieces were falling into place, but neither of them knew how just much these small moments would shift the balance of power in their world. And then, back with Baek Seol Ah, the conversation was far from over. She had just learned something new, something that would only complicate things further. Min Juryeon spoke to her with an air of frustration, admitting something she hadn't expected to hear. "And now Woo Jin isn't mine either," she said bitterly, her voice laced with jealousy. "My mom stole him from me." Baek Seol Ah was left in shock, unable to process the words as they hung in the air, adding yet another layer to the tangled web of relationships around her.
Cause you are beautiful.